All right, so we're here to jump into reading session number two of Plato's Philebus dialogue. We read number one last week. For those listening online, they could go to the description box if they'd like to read or follow last week's recording, or just read along with the PDF that's downloadable from the link in the description box as well. This is being done to sort of set the stage for a little bit of Schiller and some of Schiller's philosophical works that we will read in a few weeks' time. So I thought that some this particular dialogue just fit the Schillerian cosmology so nicely. So it was a nice little voyage, a little organic detour. Um, and before we jump into it, I think we're on page 20 on the issue of pleasure and pain. Now, the quality of pain is being introduced into the considerations of this discussion about the nature of the good, how to judge the good, what is the best standard we should utilize, the wisest standard we should select upon which we judge right and wrong, the good, the bad. Is it pleasure? Is it something else? Is it wisdom? And I think this gets at the ancient battle over utilitarianism and hedonism of pleasure. Which one is the best standard for judging what do we do as a society, as a people, as individuals? What course do we chart for our own lives? So I don't know if people would like to throw out any recollections before we begin the second reading of some of the important elements that caught their attention in our previous reading.
Well, it's not really a recollection, but maybe I want to make a small comment on the Philebus.
But
Maybe a small pedantic consideration. The Philebus is considered as one of the late dialogue by Plato. Okay, so it is considered as having been written between 360 BCE and maybe 345 BCE, so very close to his death. So I consider as a kind of synthesis of what he wanted to transmit as message. And of course, I cannot resist to make a rapprochement with the Republic, because the Philebus is a kind of a mirror of the Republic. Let's not forget that the Republic offers a hierarchy of man based on their epistemological development and corresponding to their, let's say, social rank in a fair society. In the Philebus, it goes to a more fundamental reality, if you want, that those superiors men would take their energies from deeper sources. And it's here that we have precisely the ethos hedone, peri-ethos hedone, that is the subtitle of the Philebus. And peri-ethos hedone is precisely concerning the ethics of pleasure. So I think it's quite interesting because Plato is developing here in the Philebus the psychological roots of his epistemological map as it has been offered in his dialogue, The Republic, which has been written in 375 BCE, so between 15 and 20 years before the Philebus.
Good point. Nice. Yeah, that's a great idea to have in mind as a parallel consideration. It was certainly, yeah, and just the idea that it's a very mature work, and at the later stage in these great philosophers' lives, they are trying to really synthesize their lifelong works, the lifelong thoughts and discoveries into the most dense, intelligible pedagogicals you could imagine, whether it's Leibniz or whomever you're thinking about. That's what they're always doing. So it's a great point that you're making, that it is a later work as well. And I was thinking, beyond it being the question of how to judge good and how to judge the good, whether it's pleasure or wisdom, do we remember some of the paradoxes, Paul or Kelly? Do you guys remember some of the core ideas or concepts that we were getting at last week that brought us to this stage of the argument regarding let's say the four stages, or the four aspects of reality that he's weaving there?
Yeah, damn it. If I wasn't doing the
let me ask
reading.
it this way: do you remember if he are we at the stage where it's either pleasure or is it wisdom that's the best, or is it something else that we've discovered is actually the best to
I
judge
think it was
good?
something else.
We
There's
haven't
something else,
found
right?
out
Something
yet.
else.
I don't think we know yet, but I
Um,
get the impression
so
it's some kind of combination. It's
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Combination.
Yeah,
And that was a big one. It was a combination of the two we realized is better than either one. Because it was the type of wisdom that was first being introduced was really a utilitarian wisdom, right? It wasn't one that really was compatible with the coexistence of pleasure. And the idea of pleasure that was being discussed was not the type of pleasure that had judgment, discernment involved within it. It was pure pleasure. And he made the point, well, then what differentiates us from, like, what is it? Like some clam or something? He's like some clam that's just sitting there like receiving impressions.
Yeah.
And then for wisdom, if it's a wisdom devoid of pleasure, well, then you become a utilitarian robot AI machine, right?
What I got out of it was simply that the two are not mutually exclusive.
Yeah, exactly. That's the higher synthesis, that higher third category, the composite of the two. And then he added a fourth category too, above those three. Remember, Quan, what are your?
wow, that's the everlasting cause, of course.
Yeah, the everlasting cause. Yeah.
Yes, I would like to once again push forward the hexagram, because the Chinese intuition of the hexagram is exactly the synthesis of the Philebus. You have the three lines of the lower trigram, which is the animal kingdom, which is not rejected. Okay, I insist heavily on it. And the three lines of the upper trigram, line 4, 5, and 6, which are the timeless universal principles of beauty, goodness, and truth, when expressed in time, become the mind powers of justice, of humanity, of valor, and of wisdom. So it is absolutely one of the conclusions of the Philebus that the two dimensions should be integrated.
Yep, absolutely. And then the question is just, how does that integration most wisely happen? Is it factors of pleasure that determine the integration of wisdom, or is it factors of discernment of wisdom that integrate the pleasure? How do we make those judgments along the way? So we're not fully there yet, but he's given us a lot to work with, a ton he's given us to work with as far as samples of natural observations about the universe being both finite and infinite at the same time, having elements of both, and that certain things, everything that's ponderable has both a one, an infiniteness, and a many. All three at the same time are in everything. And he makes the point as well that oftentimes people make the sloppy mistake of jumping from the one to the infinite, or from the infinite to the one. Let's say they look at the night sky and they just see infinite stars. The concept of infinite occurs as an idea very quickly. And then they're like, okay, there's the idea of star. That's the one. And the infinite star that I visually see. And they don't take the time to discern, well, are there anomalies that would help me determine whether there's a quantization in that spectrum of seemingly chaos, right? Or sometimes they'll start with a one and jump straight to the infinite. Like they'll just say, oh yeah, this is everything can be infinitely divisible. And they won't take the time to discern, like, well, was there a reason for the parts that you could find, whether in a musical symphony or in an octave or whatever in language, to be the parts that they are, before you jump straight to the infinite? So that's a mistake that people make, but he does do that in such a loving way that he gets us to appreciate that that all three exist, and there's a responsible way of managing the one, the infinite, and the many in between. And also that pleasure partakes more in one of those categories of the infinite, and that wisdom matters of, like, the virtues. There's a limited amount of so-called cardinal virtues and their opposites, which are finite, that can be imposed upon the infiniteness of the pleasures of the flesh, of the senses, that are infinite. But you need to have those finite properties to have harmony to exist in the first place. Without that, there is no harmony, right? Without health, and as he goes, without harmony, there's no idea of health. There's no idea of recovery. There's no idea of what is decay as far as falling out of harmony. There's no idea of what hunger is as far as being out of. It's a pain that keeps you out of harmony. So all of these things are important to keep in mind. So wisdom participates in the finite, in the limiting, the boundeding. The pleasures participate in the infiniteness. There's like no end to how many kinds of pleasure and gradients you could possibly accumulate, but they definitely both coexist. So that's part of the dance. We're still getting a sense of how the dance works. Yeah, I don't know. Any other thoughts before we jump in?
Well, I want to go back to the concept of harmony, because harmony is precisely what makes possible the junction of the animal kingdom with the timeless reality precisely. If you want, it's another way to say the one and the many, okay? Because you can have the many, but that many is those many are somehow harmonized because of the one, okay? So that one is precisely what made the many capable to be in order. And the finite too is interesting, okay? And I would like to use a musical example. You have a finite numbers of musical notes, but from that finite number of musical notes, you will be capable to compose an infinite numbers of melodies. So finite is not necessarily, how can I say it, in an inferior position, okay? Because once again, it's the dance between the lower trigram and the upper trigram. We might have the temptation to see the lower trigram as being inferior. It's not the case. It's simply that it has a certain role that the upper trigram doesn't have. So sometimes the fact that you have a finite series, the quantization concept precisely, it's a finite series, okay? You cannot have more than a certain levels of energies, for example. That's a finite reality, but that finite reality can bring on an infinite series of phenomena that are produced. So the two are equals, but each one has a very specific role in their harmony or in their participation together to something else that is bigger than each of them, being and becoming infinite and finite. Sorry, Paul, go ahead.
I was just going to expand a tiny little bit. I mean, you're using the analogy of harmony there. And if you go back to, let's say, the early days of classical music, Bach in particular, but Mozart and lots that followed thereon, the idea of harmony, I said it forms the foundation to musical composition, is essentially starting with a point. Let's say, you're in a particular key, the tonic note, and the structure of the piece is going to involve motion from harmony to dissonance,
yes,
and back again. Harmony that expresses the relationships, let's say from tonic to fifth to fourth and all of the non-dissonant intervals, etc., etc. But some of the better compositions, of course, are going to involve movement to a dissonant chord, a moment of, let's say, tension that resolves, according to rules, that result within a framework that resolves back onto, where you started from. I mean, you can often analyze an entire symphony as being a movement of, chord 1 to chord 5, back to chord 1, just takes 12 minutes to do it. I find that, as an analogy of a lot of things, including ideas within the electric universe, structures of the universe, I find that particularly useful to keep in the back of the mind.
Yes. And what is maybe evil is a too big a word, but maybe what is evil precisely is not to be whole, okay? Because for me, the lower trigram is of the same importance as the upper trigram. You one becoming is as important than being. So the evil is maybe the fact that they are not together, that they are not in harmony. So you might also have only being. That's not very interesting. Or you have only becoming, but without the timeless universal principles. A little bit like the fact that Schiller said that that the only healthy man or the only free man is the man having precisely being and becoming together.
Yeah. No, I think that this is good. This is good. This is getting our minds in motion nicely as we cruise now into the reading itself. Hey, history man, glad you can make it. Hey, history man. By the way, question. What's your first name, dude?
Yeah, sorry about that. Need to. I'm sorry. Hold on 1 second.
Yeah, it's fine. No. I just yeah, literally just want to know what's your first name, dude.
Sebastian, hold on 1 second.
Okay, all right, that'll help just for the future. Calling you history man's it's just a bit dissonant for me for a while after I do it too many times. Okay, so let's just jump into Philebus right here. Okay, can you guys see the screen?
Ah,
I'll make it bigger. How's that? Is that okay?
Fine for me. It's big.
Yeah, it's got a black background. Is that annoying for people? The black background?
I can deal with it.
It's better for my eyes. And I don't know how to change it back to a white background. I just don't know how. Yeah. So, okay. So like usual, we're now embarking on the new phase of our journey, which has introduced the factor now of we're still looking at the question of pleasure, and coming with pleasure is always its opposite, its absence, pain. So now that new factor of pain is being introduced into the equation. So I just highlighted that little section where we left off on where Socrates says we must next examine what is their place and under what conditions they are generated, and we will begin with pleasure, since her class was first examined, and yet pleasure cannot be rightly tested apart from pain. Yeah, and which is probably worth saying too. He just observed that let us remember that both of them, one, that mind was akin to the cause and of this family, and two, that pleasure is infinite and belongs to the class which neither has nor ever will have in itself a beginning, middle, or end of its own. That's an important thing, right? It's a beginning, middle, and an end of its own. What bounds it is not a category that comes from pleasure itself. It's the pleasure's bound, whatever boundedness we could find within the categories that we call pleasure are not from it. It's from a higher realm, as we were getting at, of mind, of that which judges that which is exists for a reason rather than for no reason. So why pleasure rather than no pleasure? Well, pleasure exists for a purpose as part of what allows life to thrive and not like go and just extinguish itself after 2 seconds. Like, why not just gorge on honey till you die? Like, why find a limit at a certain point where you're like, I've had enough honey. I'm gonna walk away with an upset stomach. But that boundedness comes from like the purpose is that pleasure exists for a reason. Pain exists for a reason. Reason, though, is the one that leads in that dance, that imposes the finiteness, that causes things like harmony to have meaning. Otherwise, if there's no finiteness, there's no harmony, right? If you just have a string that extends forever and you never get an octave, you have nothing to cut in half. If you have nothing to cut in half, you have no octave. So harmony has a purpose. So who wants to be today's Protarchus and who wants to be today's Socrates? And if Philebus comes in, who wants to be today's Philebus?
Me, Matt, I'll sign up for any of them.
I love your reading, Paul. All right, so Paul, like usual, you can be Socrates.
Okay.
Just again, like usual, go a bit slower than your instincts would normally compel. So who wants to be? Do I be Protarchus or does somebody else be Protarchus?
I could do it, I guess.
Oh, okay, Kelly. All right.
Just remind you, like that I'm on a cell phone here, so it's
Kelly, is there any way for you to get a laptop or some way for you to see it bigger? Because I know your cell phone makes it very difficult for you to read the screen.
Yeah, there's a laptop. To be honest, I don't know how. I find it really hard to use it right now, but I can get instruction.
All right, well, go ahead for today. Go for Protarchus, but try in the future to get a lap. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. I have to get this. So, shoot. Give me 1 second. I'm just going to hit pause on the recording here. Pause on the recording. I'm so sorry. It's the Dell Big Tree High Wire people. Hello. Shit. Sorry. I really need to get this. There's an issue with the recording on the Mithra Olympics discussion I did today. And I'm going to tell them if I could speak to them at 10 p.m. after we're done this. That would be great. So I won't be on the phone here for too long. Hello. This is Matthew. Hi, Matt. This is Candace from the High Wire. Hey, Candace. How are you? I'm okay. I'm just getting ready to go into a meeting. Can I call you back after 10 p.m. or is it really, really quick?
No, I just had sent you an email. I just wanted to make sure you saw it almost an hour ago.
Oh.
Questions, and then Jen just sent another one.
Oh, yeah. Can I do it by 10 p.m. at 10 p.m.? For maybe a bit sooner, eh? Okay. All right. All right. Let me get to that as soon as I can. All right. Bye. Oh yeah, it's important. You guys want to do a really short one today that ends at like 9:30?
I'm up for anything, Matt.
Okay.
Yeah, whatever's good for you.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. All right. Let's do resume. Choose. How do I do the resume? Okay, so we got a Protarchus, Kelly, and a Socrates, Paul. So Socrates, Paul, start with the highlighted yellow and then just jump straight into
sure.
Protarchus.
Jump straight in from there. Okay.
Yeah.
We must next examine what is their place and under what conditions they are generated. And we will begin with pleasure, since her class was first examined, and yet pleasure cannot be rightly tested apart from pain.
If it is this road, let us take it.
I wonder whether you would agree with me about the origin of pleasure and pain.
What do you mean?
I mean to say that their natural seat is in the mixed class.
And would you tell me again, sweet Socrates, which of the aforesaid classes is the mixed one?
I will, my fine fellow, to the best of my ability.
Very good.
Let us then understand the mixed class to be that which we placed third in the list of four.
That which followed the infinite and the finite, and in which you ranked health, and, if I am not mistaken, harmony?
Capital. And now will you please give me your best attention?
Proceed, I'm attending.
I say that when the harmony in animals is dissolved, there is also a dissolution of nature and a generation of pain.
That's probable.
And the restoration of harmony and return to nature is the source of pleasure, if I may be allowed to speak in the fewest and shortest words about matters of the greatest moment.
I believe that you're right, Socrates. But will you try to be a little plainer?
Do not obvious and everyday phenomena furnish the simplest illustration?
What phenomenon do you mean?
Hunger, for example, is a dissolution and a pain.
True.
Whereas eating is a replenishment and a pleasure.
Yes.
Thirst, again, is a destruction and a pain, but the effect of moisture replenishing the dry place is a pleasure. Once more, the unnatural separation and dissolution caused by heat is painful, and the natural restoration and refrigeration is pleasant.
Very true.
And the unnatural freezing of the moisture in an animal is pain, and the natural process of resolution and return of the elements to their original state is pleasure. And would not the general proposition seem to you to hold that the destroying of the natural union of the finite and infinite, which, as I was observing before, make up the class of living beings is pain, and that the process of return of all things to their own nature is pleasure.
Granted. What you say has general truth.
Here then is one kind of pleasures and pains originating severally in the two processes which we have described.
Good.
Let us next assume that in the soul herself there is an antecedent hope of pleasure which is sweet and refreshing, and an expectation of pain, fearful and anxious.
Yes, this is another class of pleasures and pains, which is of the soul only, apart from the body, and is produced by expectation.
Right. For in the analysis of these, pure, as I suppose them to be, the pleasures being unalloyed with pain and the pains with pleasure, methinks that we shall see clearly whether the whole class of pleasure is to be desired, or whether this quality of entire desirableness is not rather to be attributed to another of the classes which have been mentioned, and whether pleasure and pain, like heat and cold and other things of the same kind, are not sometimes to be desired and sometimes not to be desired, as being not in themselves good, but only sometimes and in some instances admitting of the nature of good.
Can you raise it?
I know. I'm trying. What? Sorry. Okay. Sorry.
Where did you leave off here?
Right at the top.
Yeah. Petrarchus.
You say most truly that this is the track which the investigation should pursue.
Well, then, assuming that pain ensues on the dissolution and pleasure on the restoration of the harmony, let us now ask what will be the condition of animated beings who are neither in process of restoration nor of dissolution. And mind what you say. I ask whether any animal who is in that condition can possibly have any feeling of pleasure or pain, great or small.
Certainly not.
Then here we have a third state over and above that of pleasure and of pain.
Very true.
And do not forget that there is such a state. It will make a great difference in our judgment of pleasure, whether we remember this or not. And I should like to say a few words about it.
What have you to say?
Why, you know that if a man chooses the life of wisdom, there is no reason why he should not live in this neutral state.
You mean that he may live neither rejoicing nor sorrowing?
Okay.
I'm going to say the answer is yes. Yes, and if I remember rightly, when the lives were compared, no degree of pleasure, whether great or small, was thought to be necessary to him who chose the life of thought and wisdom.
Yes, certainly. We said so.
Then he will live without pleasure. And who knows whether this may not be the most divine of all lives?
If so, the gods, at any rate, cannot be supposed to have either joy or sorrow.
Certainly not. There would be a great impropriety in the assumption of either alternative. But whether the gods are or are not indifferent to pleasure is a point which may be considered hereafter, if in any way relevant to the argument. And whatever is the conclusion, we will place it to the account of mind in her contest for the second place, should she have to resign the first.
Just so.
The other classes of pleasure, which, as we were saying, is purely mental, is entirely derived from memory.
What do you mean?
I must first of all analyze memory, or rather perception, which is prior to memory, if the subject of our discussion is ever to be properly cleared up.
How will you proceed?
Let us imagine affections of the body which are extinguished before they reach the soul and leave her unaffected. And again, other affections which vibrate through both soul and body and impart a shock to both and to each of them.
Granted.
And the soul may be truly said to be oblivious of the first, but not of the second.
quite true.
When I say oblivious, do not suppose that I mean forgetfulness in a literal sense, for forgetfulness is the exit of memory, which in this case has not yet entered, and to speak of the loss of that which is not yet in existence and never has been is a contradiction. Do you see?
Yes.
Then just be so good as to change the terms.
How shall I change them?
Instead of the oblivion of the soul, when you are describing the state in which she is unaffected by the shocks of the body, say unconsciousness.
I see.
And the union or communion of soul and body in one feeling and motion would be properly called consciousness.
Most true.
Then now we know the meaning of the word.
Yes.
And memory may, I think, be rightly described as the preservation of consciousness.
Right.
But do we not distinguish memory from recollection?
I think so.
And do we not mean by recollection the power which the soul has of recovering, when by herself, some feeling which she experienced when in company with the body?
Certainly.
And when she recovers of herself the lost recollection of some consciousness or knowledge, the recovery is termed recollection and reminiscence.
Very true.
There is a reason why I say all this.
What is it?
I want to attain the plainest possible notion of pleasure and desire, as they both exist in the mind only, apart from the body, and the previous analysis helps to show the nature of both.
Then now, Socrates, let us proceed to the next point.
There are certainly many things to be considered in discussing the generation and whole complexion of pleasure. At the outset, we must determine the nature and seat of desire.
Aye, let us inquire into that, for we shall lose nothing.
Nay, Petrarchus, we shall surely lose the puzzle if we find the answer.
A fair retort, but let us proceed.
Did we not place hunger, thirst, and the like in the class of desires?
Certainly.
And yet they are very different. What common nature have we in view when we call them by a single name?
By heavens, Socrates, that is a question which is not easily answered, but it must be answered.
And let us go back to our examples.
Oh, where should we begin then?
Do we mean anything when we say a man thirsts?
Yeah,
We mean to say that he is empty.
of course.
And is not thirst desire?
Yes, of drink.
Would you say of drink or of replenishment with drink?
I should say of replenishment with drink.
Then he who is empty desires, as would appear, the opposite of what he experiences, for he is empty and desires to be full.
Clearly so.
But how can a man who is empty for the first time attain either by perception or memory to any apprehension of replenishment, of which he has no present or past experience?
Impossible.
And yet he who desires surely desires something.
Of course.
He does not desire that which he experiences, for he experiences thirst, and thirst is emptiness, but he desires replenishment.
True.
Then there must be something in the thirsty man which in some way apprehends replenishment.
There must.
And that cannot be the body, for the body is supposed to be emptied.
Yes.
The only remaining alternative is that the soul apprehends the replenishment by the help of memory, as is obvious, for what other way can there be?
I can't imagine anything other.
But do you see the consequence?
What is it?
That there is no such thing as desire of the body.
Why so?
Why? Because the argument shows that the endeavor of every animal is to the reverse of his bodily state.
Yeah.
And the impulse which leads him to the opposite of what he is experiencing proves that he has a memory of the opposite state.
True.
And the argument, having proved that memory attracts us towards the objects of desire, proves also that the impulses and the desires and the moving principle in every living being have their origin in the soul.
Most true.
The argument will not allow that our body either hungers or thirsts or has any similar experience.
Quite right.
Let me make a further observation. The argument appears to me to imply that there is a kind of life which consists in these affections.
Of what affections? And what kind of life are you speaking?
I am speaking of being emptied and replenished, and of all that relates to the preservation and destruction of living beings, as well as of the pain which is felt in one of these states and of the pleasure which succeeds to it.
True.
And what would you say of the intermediate state?
What do you mean by intermediate?
I mean when a person is in actual suffering and yet remembers past pleasures which, if they would only return, would relieve him. But as yet he has them not. May we not say of him that he is in an intermediate state?
Oh, like the person who's like in the desert and they get a little bit of pleasure by remembering drinking a Pepsi Cola on a summer day last year before they were like in the plane crash, landed in the desert, and now they're super dry and parched and hot. and but they still got a bit. You can't argue that they didn't get a bit of pleasure by the memory of drinking that cold Pepsi last year, right?
Yeah, think Mirage is in the desert, Mac.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Same thing, Anyway.
Yeah, it's related for sure. Yeah.
Certainly.
Would you say that he was wholly pained or wholly pleased?
Nay, I should say that he has two pains. In his body, there is an actual experience of pain, and in his soul, longing and expectation.
What do you mean, Petrarchus, by the two pains? May not a man who is empty have at one time a sure hope of being filled, and at the other times be quite in despair?
Very true.
And he has not the pleasure of memory when he is hoping to be filled. And has he not the pleasure of memory when he is hoping to be filled? And yet in that he is empty, is he not at the same time in pain?
Certainly.
Then man and the other animals have at the same time both pleasure and pain.
I suppose so.
But when a man is empty and has no hope of being filled, there will be the double experience of pain. You observed this and inferred that the double experience was the single case possible.
Quite true, Socrates.
Shall the inquiry into these states of feeling be made the occasion of raising a question?
What question?
Whether we ought to say that the pleasures and pains of which we are speaking are true or false, or some true and some false.
But how, Socrates, can there be a false pleasure and pain?
And how, Petrarchus, can there be true and false fears, or true and false expectations, or true and false opinions?
I grant that opinions may be true or false, but not pleasures.
What do you mean? I am afraid that we are raising a very serious inquiry.
Yeah, I agree.
And yet, my boy, for you are one of Philebus's boys, the point to be considered is whether the inquiry is relevant to the argument.
Surely.
No tedious and irrelevant discussion can be allowed. What is said should be pertinent.
Right.
I am always wondering at the question which has now been raised.
How so?
Do you deny that some pleasures are false and others true?
To be sure I do.
You haven't studied advertising. Would you say that no one ever seemed to rejoice and yet did not rejoice, or seemed to feel pain and yet did not feel pain, sleeping or walking, mad or lunatic?
So we have always held, Socrates.
But were you right? Shall we inquire into the truth of your opinion?
I think that we should.
Let us then put into more precise terms the question which has arisen about pleasure and opinion. Is there such a thing as opinion?
Yeah.
And such a thing as pleasure?
Yeah.
And an opinion must be of something.
True.
And a man must be pleased by something.
You're quite correct.
That's right.
Oopsie daisy, quite correct. And whether the opinion be right or wrong makes no difference. It will still be an opinion.
Certainly.
And he who is pleased, whether he is rightly pleased or not, will always have a real feeling of pleasure.
Yes, that is quite true also.
Then how can opinion be both true and false, and pleasure true only? Although pleasure and opinion are both equally real.
Yeah, that is the question.
You mean that opinion admits of truth and falsehood, and hence becomes not merely opinion, but opinion of a certain quality, and this is what you think should be examined.
Yes.
And further, even if we admit the existence of qualities in other objects, may not pleasure and pain be simple and devoid of quality?
Clearly.
But there is no difficulty in seeing that pleasure and pain, as well as opinion, have qualities, for they are great or small, and have various degrees of intensity, as was indeed said long ago by us. Whoops. Quite true.
Quite true, Socrates.
And if badness attaches to any of them, Petrarchus, then we should speak of a bad opinion or of a bad pleasure.
Oh, quite true, Socrates.
And if rightness attaches to any of them, should we not speak of a right opinion or right pleasure, and in like manner of the reverse of rightness?
Certainly.
And if the thing opined be erroneous, might we not say that the opinion, being erroneous, is not right or rightly opined?
Certainly.
And if we see a pleasure or pain which errs in respect of its object, shall we call that right or good by any honourable name?
Not if the pleasure is mistaken. How could we?
And surely pleasure often appears to accompany an opinion which is not true but false.
Certainly it does. And in that case, Socrates, as we were saying, the opinion is false, but no one could call the actual pleasure false.
How eagerly, Petrarchus, do you rush to the defence of pleasure?
Nice, Socrates. Only repeat what I hear.
And there is no difference, my friend, between that pleasure which is associated with right opinion and knowledge, and that which is often found in all of us associated with falsehood and ignorance.
There must be a very great difference between them.
Then, now let us proceed to contemplate this difference.
Lead and I will follow.
Well, then my view is,
What is it?
we agree, do we not, that there is such a thing as false and also such a thing as true opinion.
Yes.
And pleasure and pain, as I was just now saying, are often consequent upon these, upon true and false opinion, I mean.
Very true.
And do not opinion and the endeavour to form an opinion always spring from memory and perception?
Yes, it does, certainly.
Might we imagine the process to be something of this nature?
Of what nature?
An object may be often seen at a distance not very clearly, and the seer may want to determine what it is which he sees.
Very likely.
Soon he begins to interrogate himself.
In what manner?
He asks himself, what is that which appears to be standing by the rock under the tree? This is the question which he may be supposed to put to himself when he sees such an appearance.
True.
To which he may guess the right answer, saying as if in a whisper to himself, it is a man.
Very good.
Or again, he may be misled, and then he will say, no, it is a figure made by the shepherds.
Yes.
And if he has a companion, he repeats this thought to him in articulate sounds, and what was before an opinion has now become a proposition.
Certainly.
But if he be walking alone when these thoughts occur to him, he may not unfrequently keep them in his mind for a considerable time.
Very true.
Well, now, I wonder whether you would agree in my explanation of this phenomenon.
What is your explanation?
I think that the soul at such times is like a book.
How so?
Memory and perception meet, and they and their attendant feelings seem to almost to write down words in the soul. And when the inscribing feeling writes truly, then true opinion and true propositions, which are the expressions of opinion, come into our souls. But when the scribe within us writes falsely, the result is false.
I quite assent and agree to your statement.
I must bespeak your favour also for another artist who is busy at the same time in the chambers of the soul.
Who is he?
The painter, who after the scribe has done his work, draws images in the soul of the things which he has described.
But when and how does he do this?
When a man, besides receiving from sight or some other sense, certain opinions or statements, sees in his mind the images of the subjects of them, is not this a very common mental phenomenon?
Certainly.
And the images answering to true opinions and words are true, and to false opinions and words false, are they not?
They are.
Right.
And if we are right so far, there arises a further question.
What is it?
Whether we experience the feeling of which I am speaking only in relation to the present and the past, or in relation to the future also.
I should say in relation to all times alike.
Have not purely mental pleasures and pains been described already as in some cases anticipations of the bodily ones, from which we may infer that anticipatory pleasures and pains have to do with the future?
Most true.
And do all those writings and paintings, which, as we were saying a little while ago, are produced in us, relate to the past and present only and not to the future?
To the future, very much.
When you say very much, you mean to imply that all these representations are hopes about the future, and that mankind are filled with hopes in every stage of existence.
I lost my place there. Okay, I see it. Exactly.
Answer me another question.
What question?
A just and pious and good man is the friend of the gods, is he not?
Certainly he is.
And the unjust and utterly bad man is the reverse.
True.
And all men, as we are saying just now, are always filled with hopes.
Certainly.
And these hopes, as they are termed, are propositions which exist in the minds of each of us.
Yes.
And the fancies of hope are also pictured in us. A man may often have a vision of a heap of gold and pleasures ensuing, and in the picture there may be a likeness of himself mightily rejoicing over his good fortune.
True.
And may we not say that the good, being friends of the gods, have generally true pictures presented to them, and the bad false pictures?
Yeah, I think so.
The bad, too, have pleasures painted in their fancy as well as the good, but I presume that they are false pleasures.
They are.
The bad then commonly delight in false pleasures, and the good in true pleasures.
Doubtless.
Then upon this view, there are false pleasures in the souls of men, which are a ludicrous imitation of the true, and there are pains of a similar character.
There are.
And did we not allow that a man who had an opinion at all had a real opinion, but often about things which had no existence either in the past, present, or future?
Quite true.
And this was the source of false opinion and opining. Am I not right?
Yes.
And must we not attribute to pleasure and pain a similar real but illusory character?
How do you mean?
I mean to say that a man must be admitted to have real pleasure who is pleased with anything or anyhow, and he may be pleased about things which neither have nor have ever had any real existence, and more often than not are never likely to exist.
Yes, Socrates,
Technocratic
that
future.
again is undeniable.
And may not the same be said about fear and anger and the like? Are they not often false?
Quite so.
And can opinions be good or bad except in as far as they are true or false?
In no other way.
Nor can pleasures be conceived to be bad except in so far as they are false.
Nay, Socrates, that is the very opposite of the truth. For no one would call pleasures and pains bad because they are false, but by reason of some other great corruption to which they are liable.
Well, of pleasures which are corrupt and caused by corruption, we will hereafter speak, if we care to continue the inquiry. For the present, I would rather show by another argument that there are many false pleasures existing or coming into existence in us, because this may assist our final decision.
Very true. That is to say, if there are such pleasures.
I think that there are, Petrarchus, but this is an opinion which should be well assured and not rest upon a mere assertion.
Very good.
Then, now, like wrestlers, let us approach and grasp this new argument.
Proceed.
We were maintaining a little while since that when desires, as they are termed, exist in us, then the body has separate feelings apart from the soul. Do you remember?
Yes, I remember that you said so.
And the soul was supposed to desire the opposite of the bodily state, while the body was the source of any pleasure or pain which was experienced.
True.
Then now you may infer what happens in such cases.
What am I to infer?
That in such cases, pleasures and pains come simultaneously, and there is a juxtaposition of the opposite sensations which correspond to them, as has already been shown.
Clearly.
And there is another point to which we have agreed.
What is it?
That pleasure and pain both admit of more or less, and that they are of the class of infinities. Sorry, of infinites.
Certainly, we said so.
But how can we rightly judge of them?
How can we?
Is it our intention to judge of their comparative importance and intensity, measuring pleasure against pain and pain against pain and pleasure against pleasure?
Yes, such is our intention, and we shall judge them accordingly.
Well, take the case of sight. Does not the nearness or distance of magnitudes obscure their true proportions and make us opine falsely? And do we not find the same illusion happening in the case of pleasures and pains?
Yes, Socrates, and in a degree far greater, I think.
Then what we are now saying is the opposite of what we were saying before.
What was that?
Then the opinions were true and false and infected the pleasures and pains with their own falsity.
Very true.
But now it is the pleasures which are said to be true and false because they are seen at various distances and subjected to comparison. The pleasures appear to be greater and more vehement when placed side by side with the pains, and the pains when placed side by side with the pleasures.
Certainly, and for the reason which you mentioned.
I sense this is an argument about perception. Never mind. Next, let us see whether in another direction we may not find pleasures and pains existing and appearing in living beings, which are still more false than these.
What are they, and how shall we find them?
Daisy. If I am not mistaken, I have often repeated that pains and aches and suffering and uneasiness of all sorts arise out of a corruption of nature caused by concretions and dissolutions and repletions and evacuations, and also by growth and decay.
Yes, and that has been often said.
And we have also agreed that the restoration of the natural state is pleasure.
Right.
But now let us suppose an interval of time at which the body experiences none of these changes.
When can that be, Socrates?
Your question, Petrarchus, does not help the argument.
Why not?
Because it does not prevent me from repeating mine.
But what was that?
Why, Petrarchus, admitting that there is no such interval, I may ask what would be the necessary consequence if there were.
You mean what would happen if the body were not changed either for good or bad?
Yes.
Why then, Socrates, should I suppose that there would be neither pleasure nor pain?
Very good. But still, if I am not mistaken, you do assert that we must always be experiencing one of them. That is what the wise tell us. For, say they, all things are ever flowing up and down.
Yes, and their words are of no mean authority.
Of course, for they are no mean authorities themselves. And I should like to avoid the brunt of their argument. Shall I tell you how I mean to escape from them? And you shall be the partner of my flight.
How?
To them we will say, good. But are we, or living things in general, always conscious of what happens to us? For example, of our growth or the like. And are we not, on the contrary, almost wholly unconscious of this and similar phenomena? You must answer for them. The answer is sleep.
The latter alternative is the true one.
I just want to say quickly, I really appreciate how Socrates is so very clearly developing a very rational basis for how to think about the unconscious realm of experiences that we're not aware of. And I know that I was told in psychology classes and stuff that this idea of the unconscious was a relatively recent phenomenon, and we didn't know that there was this realm of phenomenon below and shaping our conscious self until very recently. But it's all there. I mean, it's already like not even just kind of like implicitly there. It's so explicit and well thought through in Plato's works that I just really appreciate that.
Yep. And he's far from the only one of the ancients to have said such things, Matt.
Yeah, right.
Yep.
Yeah, it's nice. Just quick, Quan, is there anybody in the Chinese realm as well who are also delving into the unconscious in this way? Oh, you're on mute, Quan.
The I Ching, of course.
Of course. Okay,
And,
it's explicit, eh?
Yes.
Yeah.
If you read
Yes.
the center of the center of the center, meaning the 24 poems of the 10 wings and the development of the 10 wings, it's the explanation of the development of the layers of the mind, including definitions like the distinction between body and mind and soul.
Great.
And of course, as someone pushing a little bit for traditional Indian philosophy, let's not forget that the Om is another synthetic representation of the mind, like the hexagram.
So what would we call the unconscious?
The unconscious, that you have
Or
three.
not, the unconscious, like the part that we don't know what's going on.
Well, you have three unconscious. You have the unconscious of the body, you have the unconscious of the mind, and you have the unconscious of the soul. But the unconscious of the mind will disappear if your unawareness of the mirror of the inner soul is moved away. Okay, let's not forget that in Greek, wisdom or truth is called aletheia. Okay, and aletheia means unveiling. Okay, unveiling what? Unveiling the mirror of the soul. And when it is unveiled, that mirror of the soul makes you capable to see everything that has been inside your mind. And let's not forget that in his dialogue, he will speak about that the mental pleasures is completely from memory. And that there's a consequence, there's no pleasure of the body. Okay? What he does he mean by that? It's not only that Of course, that's the traditional distinction between the needs of the body and the pleasures of the mind. Okay. However, the mental pleasure completely from memory have also the mental displeasure from the completely from memory too. And let's not forget that when you have a big displeasure, traumas, for example, it can be pushed into the darkness because it's a mechanism of protection for you. And when you develop your soul or you unveil your soul, but because you cannot develop your soul, okay, your soul is something that has been given to you at birth, but you might be not be skillful in being in contact with that inner mirror. But when you become skillful to be in contact of that inner mirror, everything that is mental inside you will be seen directly by you.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
Very
Okay.
good.
A couple of concrete examples here. I can think of when we talk about, for example, physical qualities that can be unknown. Think of all of those times when you have either experienced it yourself or read about it, where somebody in an emergency situation, let's say, suddenly finds the strength to lift a car and retrieve a baby that's underneath, or something along those lines. And then think of times, and again, countless examples where people who, come up with a discovery or a song or whatever will say that it just appeared in my mind suddenly. In other words, there is no memory of the preceding steps that led me to this discovery, this composition, this whatever. It just suddenly appeared, and we use the computer term these days of a download. Surely, in our little discussion before, we were talking about unconsciousness, Matt, and how the modern concept of unconsciousness presumed that nobody in the past had any understanding of such things, that those two things that I've just described, let's say a download that has no memory pathway to connect it, and physical expressions that are sometimes way beyond what one assumes one's abilities are, must have been just as common back then as they are now. Maybe not
Yes.
numerically as common, but
Well,
part of the process.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And you'd see that probably a lot in battle too, right? Where people who didn't think that they had the ability to do a certain thing when the moment came to carry out acts and feats that were unimaginably powerful. And more people did have access to those types of tests.
Yeah.
My mom actually lifted a car to save her brother when she was like 20 and his head got stuck under a wheel. He lived, but she actually lifted the car as a young 20-year-old girl. She lifted a car by herself. And all my family can attest to that story. But yeah, I liked as well what he's saying about the memory and by introducing memory into the function. There's this example, like this idea that you could reframe what you think pleasure and pain is around this idea of an a yearning to be brought back into harmony. Like as soon as you introduce harmony in memory, you're like, okay, well, what I thought was simply pain becomes actually a yearning to be filled or to be harmonious, to be at one with myself. Right. And all of a sudden now there's a function of a process instead of it just being like the popular idea that my body is experiencing pain. It's not that anymore. It's like my all of a sudden it's a different reframed idea of a process of my yearning to be healthy once more is actually what I'm perceiving as an effect, a shadow of pain. That you're, but then again, it's also tied up with this question of pleasure too, because a distorted person who's really out of whack with themselves could end up being induced to find pleasures in pain, as we see with people who can only watch horror movies to go to sleep, right? And that's not natural. But I know people who have told me that they're in that state where they can only fall asleep if they watched a zombie movie, and it's like, but that adds additional layers of complexity to it, right?
Well, I would say
wouldn't
that
you love to be able to record their dreams?
Yeah,
yeah,
right.
but I would say that it gives me the occasion to talk about memories as the finite and awareness as the infinite. What I mean by that? Because one general definition of memory is a structure that can be repeated, right? The person that who needs to watch a horror movie before going to bed, that's a memory which needs to be repeated, a habit, okay?
Hmm.
So that memory which needs to be repeated can goes on and goes on as a loop, or it can be modified because that person would be in his infinite awareness. So the only hasty way to free yourself from certain memories, from certain finite loops, is to precisely get to the power or the energy of the infinite awareness. And here, once again, we have the occasion to go back to the dance between the finite and the infinite. Okay, like a composition, for example, I don't know, Don Giovanni by Mozart. Well, it might be very strange to define it like that, but it's a memory. Okay, it's a stuff that can be repeated because the notes are codified in a certain manner, but we listen to it with awareness. So the fact that we listen to that with awareness, the Don Giovanni that I'm listening to in Milan last year is not exactly the Don Giovanni that I am listening in New York next year, right? But it's the same succession of notes, meaning the same memory, the same structure that can be repeated. But when it is perceived with full awareness, it is a new one. So once again, the finite and the infinite.
Can I add that something like being aware of your awareness?
Yeah.
Or like being aware of that feeling, like you feel pain, and then I feel that my awareness of feeling pain.
Yeah. My dear Kelly, I didn't know that you are a natural meditator because you just gave the absolute definition of infinite awareness.
And then
Meaning
that'll lead you into a place where
yes,
where you can like progress with that.
well, that
Where
is
you can
the
be
only
tortured by the
place,
fascists and you'll be okay with it, kind of.
but that's
Something
the
like
only
that.
place. That's the only place where you can progress. Okay, because that is what is called in meditation the space. Okay, or if I want to push a little bit a Sanskrit word, it's called dhyana, Dhyana, and dhyana is sadly translated most of the time as meditation, but it's a very wrong translation because meditation in English has more the meaning of pondering upon something, right? It's not meditation in the true meaning of the term, which is that space that you were talking about precisely, Kelly, meaning that you are aware that you are sensing that pain.
Yeah.
Well, and I have a
And-
question here. I just want some clarification in your thinking. Going back to the musical example that you just gave, Don Giovanni, you're listening to it in one place 12 months ago, and then a year in the future, you're listening to the same piece in a different setting, different country, as you mentioned, in fact. What might go through the mind, what would certainly likely go through my mind, is a comparison of the two performances as I'm watching, particularly as I'm watching the second one. How does this one compare to the last one? And, you know, making judgments, you know, good, bad, indifferent, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Some of which will simply be the mood that, you know, that you happen to be in that day, and some of which is an exercise in judgment. Where does that fit in to your ideas here?
Well, I would say that the desire to make, and even it's not a desire, it would be an automatic function of your mind that would want to make that comparison, because comparison is an automatic operation of the mind. So what would be pure awareness would be the fact that you have a meta representation of everything that is working in your mind at the time. I think, Paul, you know that classical music has been developed for the development of meditation in India, in China, because music has something that is very capable of going into our heart, into our deep emotions. And there is no place in us that would bring us directly to that space that Kelly was speaking of 5 minutes ago than music, especially classical music. And
yeah, the same is true in Western music, mate. It's as true
absolutely,
of Western music, of a particular
absolutely.
period.
And well, I have a prejudice. Okay, classical music in the West for me is the music between the 16th century and the end of the 19th century. But that's my prejudice. Okay,
I'm going to agree with you there, mate. I'm going to agree with you there. Look, I hate it when this happens. There is actually a word that I just cannot get into my mind, which describes the way in which music can be used to produce specific emotions.
Yes.
Can lead the mind, lead the experience in a certain direction, good and bad. I mean, look at what Hitler and all of the Nazis did with Wagner's music, for example.
Yes. And here, I think that what is extraordinary with the Philebus is that the body can give you a certain number of pleasure, of course, but they cannot be infinite because the body is a memory structure with its inbuilt limits. Okay, and here we come back to the notion of quantization, because when we talk about quantization, we often think to the levels energy within an atoms and so on. But quantization, what is the most familiar stuff that is the embodiment, if I may say so, and it's not a pun, of quantization? It's the body. Okay, the body functions according to certain limits. Okay, the body cannot survive within a certain range of temperature, etc., etc. I'm not going to list the long list, but the mind is not the same, because the mind, and I gave the example of the appreciation of the same memory structure, a piece of music, but with a mind endowed with the capacity of meta representation, meaning a mind capable to dwell within infinite awareness when living in time. Okay, and that is precisely freedom. Okay, you know that you have a finite component of you, but you also have you are in contact with the infinite component of you, and that is the dance between the two that will create the freedom.
That's beautiful, Quan. That's
The
really...
word I was trying to remember is called Affektenlehre.
Yes, absolutely. And it's not for nothing that the Philebus is a composition of Plato's own age. The guy wanted to leave something truly outstanding before dying, of course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Here's another. This is an ignorant question in its own way. How old was Plato when he died?
343. So, according to what the historian of philosophy knows nowadays, the Philebus was composed somewhere between 360 BCE and 347 BCE. If we accept 347 BCE, it means 4 years before he died.
And how old was he when he died?
80. He was born I make a mistake. He was born in 427 BCE and he died in 347 BCE at 80 years old. So if we accept, even better, if we accept 347 BCE as the last date of composition of the Philebus, it means that he wrote it just before dying, or he perfected just before dying. Okay, he might have written the composition over many years and make many corrections, of course.
There's hope for me yet. What that tells me is that I might be capable of producing my best drum solo between now and the age of 80.
Do it, Paul. Do it.
Yeah. We don't have time for it, but I could share an anecdote about the performance that I did last week. I was miserable. We'd had 2 days of rain. I wanted that performance to be cancelled. I did not want to drive all the way in. I got there. The place was full of people. The band fired up. I did one of the best performances that I've ever done.
Do you ever record? Do you have any of your performances recorded on YouTube or whatever?
I have all of them recorded, Matt.
Well, send me a couple. I'm curious to see you in action, Paul.
Yeah, do you
Give me
have
2
like a
seconds.
YouTube thing?
Yeah.
Give me 2 seconds. Just a minute. I just
Yeah,
got
share it in
YouTube
the
link.
chat. And then I'm gonna have to
look,
roll out for an emergency meeting. Unfortunately. So I'll wait till you share the recording.
let me just see what I can find.
Well, what you can do, Paul, actually just send it to me by email, and then I'll make sure that everybody gets it as well, so we can all see you in action. And
Yeah. So we
Yeah.
can take the time to appreciate it and give you a very constructive critic next time.
yeah, let's do that. So send me an email, Paul.
I'll do that, but if you wait
Paul,
2 seconds,
Paul,
if you wait 2 seconds, yeah.
You on Telegram, no, Paul? You on Telegram?
Yes, I'm on Telegram. Yes, I can do it there,
Yeah.
but if you just
All
give
right.
me 2 seconds.
All right, we'll
Why
give you
can't
2
I get
seconds.
that back
All
up?
right.
Where's the chat box?
It's the bottom of the
Here we
Zoom
are. I've got
screen.
it. Yeah, I've got it. I've got it. Okay.
There we are. Facebook. Okay, I'm on it.
Okay, that's a Facebook post. That's one set from last week. See, the
Okay.
thing is, at my age, you know, you could appreciate this, I'm sure all of you. There will come a time, and I've sort of been speaking about this with, you know, family and friends, where it's too difficult both to get to the venue, to set up, to do the performance, to play at a standard that I think is worthy. It's just age. It's just me. And, you know, I won't say that I've been thinking, oh, that time is coming, it's imminent or whatever, but, you know, you have it in the back of your mind. And yet, like I said, considering how I felt, and then when I saw the videos of the performance and enjoyed the performance, by the way, that's a whole other thing, of course, because you're in the moment. I came away thinking you've got to stop thinking the way you do. You cannot put limits on what you're going to be able to achieve between now and the time that you might not be here anymore. Yeah.
Yeah. It's true.
Okay,
Boundary
enjoy the
conditions are
performance.
part
I
of
hope-
happiness, and like
Yeah.
I've Cynthia's been trying to like teach me to learn how to create boundary conditions, because I just say yes to everything and it wears me out. And I've been feeling better. It's challenging, but it's been a multi-year long effort to learn how to say no and to create my space to breathe a little bit, and it does pay off. My stress level has ultimately gone down.
Hey, Paul, can you? I will send into the chat my email, and please send it to me by email, because I have a difficulty to transfer it to my tablet.
Okay, look, I'll see about that one. This will depend on the length of the file. I can send you that link, that's for sure, but I can actually send you the video itself via WeTransfer. I'll try and do both.
Okay, so okay,
I'll try and do both. Yeah.
I just send you my email.
Yep, I've got it.
Is there a particular meaning, Quan, just out of curiosity, before we leave to... I keep looking at your email and I imagine a kitten being thrown on a football field, or a flying kitten. What was in your mind when you chose that?
Oh, that's a secret between me and my wife. That's a very old email that I kept by romanticism. So,
Okay. All right. I thought it was something like that. Okay, cool. Good. Guys, always a great pleasure. Great for the soul. So we'll catch back next Wednesday. And I think this coming Sunday, for those who are interested, we have on the schedule Nancy Spanis. Unless she's, yeah, so probably Nancy Spanis, if not something else. But there's going to be a class on Sunday at 2 p.m. And otherwise, Plato, Philebus number 3 next Wednesday. So thank you all, and looking forward to listening to more Paul on the drums. Bye.
And I'll send you an email as soon as I finish here, Quan.
Thank you very much, Paul.
Yeah.
Good night, guys.
A pleasure. No worries.
Ciao.
Good night, folks.
Good night.